Extras.
I'm not sure how conscious it is, but when I'm designing a dungeon, I tend to put in details which are clearly not tailored to our actual party or to the current plot. If I claim to be that smart, I would compare it to The Empire Strikes Back. Vader wants the Millennium Falcon, and he knows his Imperial goons can blanket the skies, but they can't get into all the places those rebel smuggler terrorists go. So he gathers together some of the nastiest bounty hunters in the sector, gives them his pep talk, and sends them out. All these unique-looking characters, and 80% of them never get another second of screen time. If you were a movie studio executive, you might think, that's a waste of design and costume budget, maybe even distracting. Can we cut that? But little details like that, and what Lucas called random real-world feel, are part of what made Star Wars feel like such a wide, real universe in the original trilogy, without showing a bunch of CG planets and shit. So Polaron has some things which seem like they clearly were not designed for our PCs. The invisible spider-climbing shield generators would be incredibly obnoxious to most groups, but since Little One has permanent C and Viz, they're just sitting ducks up there. Though, still sitting ducks you have to take out first. In that vein, though, there were technically some other magic items they had found by this point, more Itaran protective clothing. 2 suits of heat protection gear, which were +1 leather armor with fire resistance 24. That's a crap ton of fire resistance. But at their character level, and the level of threats our heroes deal with, +1 leather armor, which might as well be non-magical studded leather, provides very poor armor class. It would effectively mean trading a lot of physical defense for a lot of fire protection, like early resistance gear in World of Warcraft. But that would be an interesting choice if the party didn't have broad and flexible access to spells like you get from a wizard, cleric, or artificer. I know they did eventually find these, and weren't overly excited. I wouldn't be either, because I would just cast mass resist energy fire, but Draven hadn't shown any signs of using the spell up to this point in the campaign, and it seemed like a good idea to provide the strategic option of fire protection within this lava-filled dungeon. Plus, the Atarans would have had some. I believe these were located in purification for working around the dangerously hot magma processing pipes and equipment. In the video, I suggested they didn't explore purification for time, for story flow, and also because that was during the session when I had no audio notes. But it's more that they didn't go very far in or explore it in detail, because they were worried about any kind of traps or malfunctions in the lava equipment, or whatever might attack them around said lava processors. Worried enough that they chose the hallway instead of the room for their rope trick hideout. Labeled the Behold droid in my notes, purely because it sounds cool, not that it is in any way robotic. This Mutant Beholder in a can was bred by the Atarans as part of a secret program many of their people considered unethical to farm the precious Eldritch Eyes required for true teleportation magic. Normally, Eldritch Eyes are available only from monsters which are both rare and hard to find, and often exceptionally dangerous due to their otherworldly powers. Beholders seem like a natural pick. They possess immense magical energy and project it through an array of deadly eye stalks. But not only were those eye stalks proven insufficient to serve as teleportation components, but even getting those required powerful adventurers, if not a full-blown mechanized military expedition, and even that had to contend with the Beholder's mighty anti-magic cone, a defense so powerful that it can temporarily negate even the most powerful spells and buffs. We all know Beholders are dangerous. A proper Beholder fight involves battling it in its home network of vertical and horizontal tunnels, which it would disintegrate through solid stone, creating an environment where it can duck in and out of tunnels from seemingly any direction, blast foes with deadly eye rays, then cover them all in anti-magic cone. The poor beleaguered PCs attack back as best they can without spells or even buffs. Then, on its next turn, the Beholder turns its cone away from the enemies, blasts them with its eyes again, and levitates back into its anthill of tunnels to break line of sight and look for the next chance to attack. After somehow not just hunting down and slaying several Beholders, but actually capturing one of them alive at a cost of who knows how many Warforged and Golems. The Atarans, or at least some of them, extracted this aberration's central eye and imprisoned it in a metal housing with its eye stalks handcuffed in a cluster of custom-made connected metal spheres. With all its attacks neutralized, they then set to work experimenting on and eventually transmuting the clinically immortal creature over a course of many decades. Beholders are deadly, xenophobic, violent, merciless beings, true monsters without empathy. Even the most social of their kind are manipulative and fascist tyrants in pursuit of their goals. But the team in charge of this Eldritch Eye farming project, for all their scientific rationale and veneer of civility, did not distinguish themselves very well in terms of empathy, subjecting a being of great intelligence to physically torturous experimentation and outright surgical amputations, and to the psychological torture of imprisonment and sensory deprivation. But without the power-hungry central eye, it did prove possible to alter the eye stalks to absorb more of the vast magical energy generated by the beholder, physically swelling, but also swelling in that sweet aberration-y power that was required to cast the spell Teleport, or to create items with similar powers. By the time this particular broken, solitary travesty of a creature was manipulated into attacking the heroes, it wasn't in the best of shape. It had the same basic stats as a Beholder, with just a little more armor class because the cone was tough, +8 armor like immobile full plate, but the Beholder was denied its dex bonus in the cone, and its natural armor had been degraded by the experiments and poor living conditions. Now, with similar stats and the loss of the Beholder's true greatest weapons, its mobility, its lair, and its anti-magic cone, I had a lot of leeway to modify this thing in other ways without increasing, or possibly even slightly decreasing, its challenge rating. First off, a Beholder's CR of 13 is putting a lot of value on that mobility and anti-magic cone as powerful defenses. Not to mention, they're from Monster Manual 1, which is notoriously biased towards giving monsters way too few hit points for dealing with optimized player characters who are working from multiple splat books. So I flat out gave it 50 more hit points, from 93 to 143, and tweaked its AC from 26 to 28. Knowing that our party can dish out damage like crazy, I had no concerns about this. But next was the fun part, screwing around with its eyes. I didn't waste time on eyes I was less likely to use, so I only messed with 4 of them. I was not increasing the save DC, and the party in general have massive saves because they have a guy who can craft cloaks of resistance at a discount. So my bias was towards giving the eyes a better chance of success by hitting multiple targets. And I like the idea that the eyes are less focused, more AoEs and fewer rays, because they're so swollen with power, less accurate, but a lot of that energy is just being wasted blanketing a broad area, instead of focusing on a single target like a proper Beholder. First, I wanted more exciting, more cinematic action from its TK, so Beholdroid's telekinesis eye is not a ray, but instead hits a 15-foot cube. All targets in that area make DC 17 will save, or are launched back 1d4 plus 2 times 10 feet away from the caster, and suffer 3d6 plus 3 damage if they hit a wall or other hard object, not counting the 4. Or, of course, it could use the ability to shatter 2 of the crystal tubes in the Eldritch Lab, releasing the gibbering mouthers. I also made the Fear eye stalk an area. Normally it's a ray, which otherwise affects the target like the level 4 Fear spell. Hell, I just gave it the actual spell, so its Fear is a 30-foot cone. Useful for driving away those pesky hand-to-hand fighters, which is not the worst, because even on a successful save, the victims are shaken for 1 round, which gives them -2 to hit, and saves. The Flesh to Stone eye I left mostly unchanged. It's a save or die. You may have noticed they aren't my favorite. But it's not really death, because at this level the players can pretty easily reverse the condition. But it's still save or die in the sense that on a failed save, it would take a hero out of the fight completely. The one thing that I thought would be cool was to give this Beholder the option to heal itself 2d8 plus 10 with the Flesh to Stone ray, by literally sacrificing some of its crappy, aged body to staunch the blood flow. The interesting thing about that is, this doesn't cost it one of its 3 eye actions in a normal round, because it's 3 eyes per 90-degree arc, and if it's targeting itself, it could use the Flesh to Stone in a different fire arc. So, if it had not been disabled so utterly, it could have been trolling 2d8 plus 10 hit points per round to help it last against our very strong party. Though, using it more than a couple times would represent serious desperation, so I probably would have alternated between healing itself and attempting to stone people. Finally, there's the Disintegrate Eye. As we already know, I'm not a big fan of Save or Die, but Disintegrate at least has the advantage of being damage-based. Normal Disintegrate deals 5d6 if you save. A nice consolation, not nothing, but very little for a 6th level spell. However, on a failed Fortitude save, the target takes 2d6 per caster level, max 40d6 at caster level 20, which is twice as much as a normal damage spell, and has no damage type, so it generally isn't resisted by anything. However, this is a big, bloated mutant eye stock, and I really like the idea of a beam which sweeps along, disintegrating a groove in the floor and hitting multiple PCs, while being less instantly lethal. My Beholder has a caster level of 12, so its Disintegrate ought to be 24d6, average about 84 damage, though it's random enough that it could plausibly do over 100 on a high roll, which is getting close to one-shotting Angel. Instead, I have it sweep an area. It just draws a 30-foot line between pretty much any 2 points in range. It's medium range, so pretty much anywhere in the lab. And the 24d6 is divided evenly among the number of creatures in that line. But because it's spraying out disintegration all willy-nilly, it's saved for half instead of Fortitude negates. So when, in the episode, it swept the beam from the illusionary Ataran across the little one, we divided the damage in 2. I know the Ataran wasn't a real creature, but the Beholder was trying to kill it. If it hit 3 targets, it would deal 8d6 to each, and if it couldn't hit more than one target, it could focus the beam on a single target, at which point I would treat it like a real Disintegrate with to-hit roll and only 5d6 on a successful save, just for game balance reasons, because full damage Disintegrate as a save for half would be quite overpowered. Or I could always have it disintegrate some more of the cone if I wanted it to free itself to move around, though at that point I would drop its AC by 6 to 22, less than a normal Beholder, losing its cone armor but regaining its +2 AC from Dex. Due to its poor health, plus because they'd be fighting in a big open room, its extraordinary flight ability would be less advantageous than in a proper Beholder battle. I mentioned in the video that I decided to treat weapon buffs as buffs on the character to create fewer rules anomalies. Chances are someone wanted me to explain what I meant by that. The thing is, when Draven uses his artificing to temporarily give a weapon Bane against some creature type, technically he is casting a spell on the weapon itself, not on the character. But when you start dealing with dispelling, that gets messy fast. Like, normally, an item carried or worn by a creature uses that creature's saving throws, so if you get hit by Flesh to Stone, then if you succeed at your saving throw, your possessions are fine. But if you fail to save, your clothes turn to stone with you, and normally your weapons would too, though I'm sure many GMs might make exception for powerful magic items. Then again, having to de-stone a creature to access a magic item could be a cool plot point. But anyway, everything feels more like it makes sense if temporary weapon buffs count as a buff on the weapon and on the character. If they're hit by a single target dispel, that weapon buff should be affected like any other buff. If they're hit by an area dispel, then the weapon buff should count towards the maximum of one effect that can be dispelled per target. If you did treat the weapon buff as totally separate from the character, then you'd go through and dispel up to one buff per creature, and dispel up to one buff per weapon in the area, which would effectively allow it to knock 2 buffs off a single creature, which doesn't seem like the spirit of what the area version of Dispel Magic is supposed to do. Anyway, treating buff on your weapon as a buff on you, to me, makes the whole situation work in a more straightforward and consistent manner. I genuinely expected the Beholder to last at least the 3 rounds for the Dark Ancient to pop back in from teleportation limbo. It had extra hit points, decent enough AC. Their, at this point standard, Bane constructs did not apply to it, but moreover, the Mutant Beholder had 2 different area powers which PCs would probably save against, but hitting at least 2 PCs with each, twice per round, there's a good chance it could fear or knock away at least one of them every couple turns. The telekinesis, even with haste, would at least stop that player from being able to full attack. One failed save against the fear could actually take that player out of the fight entirely. Panicked for 12 rounds? Even saving against the fear cone gives them -2 to hit, and saving throws the next round, making it easier to land something else. Meanwhile, it would have petrification and disintegration saves thrown in, with the chance of players being blinded by gibbering mouther spittle, or theoretically even confused by the mouthers. The Beholdroid couldn't stand up to the PCs long in a straight-up fight. That's just math. But there was a really good chance of temporarily disrupting or disabling multiple players, or of taking one of them out of the fight completely in the first couple rounds, and that's all it might take to keep the Beholder alive and blasting out more saves and more disintegrate damage. But that's not what happened. So, meta teleport bluffs aside, the Dark Ancient's Magma Sifter flying drone thing reappeared to a healthy and mostly prepared party, and there was a very significant risk of him getting hit by one of those damn dimensional anchor daggers I'd given out so long ago. What would have happened then? The Dark Ancient was in a mediocre combat body. It flies with perfect maneuverability, but it is not built for speed, and the party was still hasted, with nothing but a few CR5 puddles to slow them down. Assuming it started the encounter fully buffed for combat, if it opened by entangling Little One, or by dispelling multiple people's haste, either of which was a bit of a gamble, there still wasn't much chance of him making it out of there, unless he knew the location of a nearby construct to transfer his consciousness to. And even if he did make it out of the room, he would take a lot of damage, and a fraction of that damage applies to the Dark Ancient's true hit points, which carry over from body to body and recover slowly, like only through natural healing, so about a dozen HP per day in this case. Taking that damage would limit how much I could use him for the rest of the dungeon, whereas, as you may have guessed, killing him would have messed up my plans a fair amount. There was a backup plan, to bring the dungeon to a suitably epic conclusion, but it would have been much less satisfying for me. But I could have adjusted. I can't really explain yet, because spoilers. As you've probably heard by now, my Patreon patrons get extras about a week early, giving them a chance to ask additional questions about this or prior episodes. This time, Arthur asked a bunch of questions, including, has anyone other than the party tried to loot any Ataran facilities? And, if the Diluvians make shipping impossible, how do the economies of the continent function? The Atarans have been gone for many centuries, and the PCs are far from the first to explore their empty halls. The dwarves have uncovered and explored numerous Ataran facilities because their territory, Tark, was all Ataran territory in ancient times. The ancient robot lumberjack is far from the only thing the dwarves inherited from the ancients. However, most of the facilities they found were much less significant than Ginneron or Polaron, usually smaller, more mundane, and often already plundered by monsters or humanoids who probably had no understanding of the value of the items left behind. And some were probably plundered by far more dangerous forces who knew all too well what was there. Nearly all of the Warforged who currently walk the lands, not that there are that many of them, were discovered in such facilities or small sealed caches in that strange form of suspended animation. It's also rumored that the last dying Atarans gave much of their more valuable or dangerous material to those friends who they trusted, including the Adar, not knowing that the Adar themselves would disappear a few centuries later. Between the old Ataran junk, though new finds have been increasingly rare in the last 200 years, and re-exploring the ancient dwarf holds, archaeology is a highly valued profession among the modern dwarves. But nobody in recent memory has explored Ataran facilities nearly as amazing as Polaron and Ginneron, and pretty much nobody, except possibly the elves, even suspects there's Ataran junk so far north of Tark. As far as shipping in the world of TDDC, it's true that there's, effectively, zero sea trade on the west coast, south of Istria. Even intra-city trade basically doesn't exist on the seas there, and stubborn, desperate fishermen in their southern waters frequently don't come back. The Diluvians don't like and rarely venture into the cold waters north of Istria, even though the aquatic creatures seem unbothered by the cold of the ocean depths. It's worth bearing in mind that due to somewhat different physics of this world, underground depths are less hot than the real-world equivalent, and the bottom of the ocean is far less cold and the pressure exponentially less crushing than it would be at the same depth on Earth. But whatever the reason, Vistrian ships can sail the northern coast, and in the warm months of the year they can sail the summer sea all the way to trade with their brother nation, Korstrad, though the farming communities there are little more than a shadow of their former glory, and the once nomadic tribes, though now mainly settled, do not have the numbers or economy to provide more than a fraction of the goods the cornered Vistrians desperately need. Even with such meager trading partners, some Vistrian captains and crews brave incredibly dangerous icy waters in the spring and the fall to try and get just one more load of precious cargo through, because the North Pass, the land route, is also treacherous in the winter and is at deadly risk of orc attacks year-round. Now, elsewhere on the continent, there is tons of land trade, slower and less efficient than the shipping, but within most of the Elven lands and most of the Laric to Tark route and internal Tarkish trade, the caravans are pretty safe. For a D&D world, anyway. And because of the treaty with the Illud, sea trade between Tark and the Elven lands is also pretty safe. There's a major trading city, Stadt Verbundet, in the shadow of historic Blue Mountain, about halfway between the Elven and Dwarven coastal cities, inhabited by elves, dwarves, and the Illud Kuatoa, and even one of the largest communities of Dragonborn on the continent, though that's still a small part of the city. Many ships stop there to exchange goods between elf, dwarf, and Kua, despite a significant toll paid in swords. It's also rumored in the taverns of the Stadt that if you know the secrets of the seas and of the tides, you can even sail across to the Feywild and the Eladrin ports. The interesting shipping mostly happens between the western edge of Tark, near the Peace Bond, down and around to the eastern coast of Tark, a route called the Diamond Coast. The dwarven settlements along the coast each have an Illud envoy, a military advisor along with some Illud and slave troops. Remember the Illud guards outside the entrance of Ginneron? That's where they come from. The dwarves are mostly moving materials which are not abundant further west, plus metalworks, largely weapons, to be sold to the Illud to arm their slave legions. So heavy dwarven ships sail around the Horn with metal-plated hull armor, full of both dwarven marines and usually Illud Sahagwin slaves for underwater coverage. Sahagwin, of course, meaning sharks as well. Those vessels are frequently attacked by Diluvian raiding forces and, if they're not lucky, sea monsters, resulting in bloody battles and high stakes, major profits on the line for the merchant ship owners, while each sunken ship both denies weapons to the Illud and provides a free stockpile to the evil empire. Let's just say there's a lot of action down there. I want to give a huge holiday thanks to all my generous Patreon patrons. They got to watch this video first, and like Arthur, they had a chance to give feedback on any topics from this or prior episodes they wanted to know more about. There's plenty of room for more questions. Thanks so much for your continued support, and with a special shout out to Gander, Pericles, Sildari, Lord Avon, and Tyranno MCG, the members of the organization. And if you can't afford to contribute financially or just don't feel like it, remember, it doesn't cost you a dime to like and share Tales from my D&D campaign. Just a heads up, there will not be any Sunday Morning Heroes until mid-January due to the holidays, but I have no life, so I'm working on stuff as much as possible through the Christmas break.